Welcome back, everybody, to the Inking Out Loud podcast. On this 16th episode, we're going to dive into Skyward, the first title in fantasy titan Brandon Sanderson's newest young adult series. I'm your host, Rob Santos, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Drew McCaffrey.
How's it going, everybody?
And returning special guest, Jarrod Livingston.
What's up, guys?
Now,
welcome back.
Yeah, welcome, man.
Woo!
I really don't have much more to say right now because, now that we're veering away from Stover for a little bit of a breather, meaning I really don't need to precede this episode with a warning about the graphic and the gruesome and another G word that I don't even know kind of content that we've been subjected to over the past few weeks. Thanks,
Yeah.
Drew.
You're welcome.
But, seriously, this was a very welcome break. Stover has some incredible content, to be sure, but I felt that reading Skyward in between halves of the Axe of Cain, just as a comparison, was a lot like what I imagined it would be to find a patch of roses just inexplicably growing in between fields of manure, right? And yes, I said manure because since we're dealing with a more family-friendly kind of subject this week, we're also going to thank Pat McCaffrey once again for the heavy censoring he might have to do for this episode. So, yeah, thanks again, Pat. And thank you, Jarrod, for being on today.
Cheers.
Now, we're going to talk about the entirety of the book in this episode. So, we also figured it was best to dispense with the usual, Drew recaps everything for today. Since we're such huge fans of Sanderson already, we're just going to hit the ground running. Or, more like hit the ground at a very horizontal angle and try to salvage our ship, Hurl.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah. Too soon? I don't know. I think it was fine. But yeah, let's kick it off, man.
well, do we want to start on that topic then?
What? Darkness?
The sort of.
Yeah, sure.
So Skyward's a YA book, right?
It is.
And it's
I'm going to open a beer.
certainly a breath of fresh air after reading Blade of Taishao. It's a lot more easy on the soul, so
Yeah.
to speak.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean that there aren't dark moments in it, and there's kind of the subject of all the cadets who die or are otherwise psychologically traumatized in
Yes.
this book, and it was honestly something that I kind of liked in this book. How early on we have that the statistic given, only statistically only 2 out of every 10 cadets in a class will become full-time pilots. And it might have been 3 out of 10 or something like
I
that.
actually don't remember the exact statistic, but I remember reading a line a lot like that, yeah.
Yeah, and
How old are they supposed to be?
16 to 18, I want to say, 19 maybe for the most part. I think it was 18.
But going in, you kind of expect this is the main characters class.
Yeah.
These are the people, the characters you're getting to know and love, and so maybe a couple of them will have to drop out, and maybe one of them will die, but they'll have a better rate. No, not even a little bit. They drop like flies in this book, and that's one of the things I liked the most about it. In fact, was how well Brandon developed these side characters in the cadets that made those deaths and those losses really hit home.
Yeah. No, he definitely.
It didn't feel like he was forcing the deaths to try and prove a point about the 1 out of or 2 out of 10 rate, whatever it is. They all seemed, natural.
Yeah, they all kind of just happened, well, not all, but for the most part, especially I noticed with Bim and Morningtide, they were sudden. You didn't get any warning that they were going to happen. And you kind of, in that moment, you were just as shocked and breathless as Spencer herself was. But and this is something I wanted to talk about too, because what I think that, as with the rest of his, with the rest of his young adult releases, with the exception of Rhythmatist, this novel's written entirely in first person, so it matches them in that sense. But it does, as Drew and Jarrod are mentioning here, it does have a few darker tones and more adult themes. What sets this apart, I think, is some of not only do some of our favorite characters die so quickly that we're just left oh my god, but we have textbook instances that follow of survivor's guilt. There was a moment in chapter 41, and I quote from the text: "A wave of guilt erased my smile. It had only been 3 weeks since Hurl's death. I shouldn't feel happy." These are things I was not ready to read when I picked up this book, or rather when I downloaded it on my e-reader and on Audible. But to take that even a step further, I think we have this horrifying moment of realization after Spensa manages to save, her squad mate's life, Netter's life. We find out that he was chasing after and attempting to save the lives of his brothers, who then ended up, losing their lives in the battle. It's just, I think it's also really interesting to note that at this exact point with, the revelation of what Netter was trying to do, this was at the dead center halfway point of the book. Dead center. For example, at that moment, I was listening at work on Audible. It was 7 hours, 40 minutes in, 7 hours, 42 remaining. At normal playback speed, of course. But yeah, this book definitely had a lot more adult, darker themes, and I wasn't ready, but I was pleasantly surprised, and I really enjoyed it. I really did.
And I think the characters dealt with the darkness in a realistic fashion, which I liked.
Yeah, we see characters develop PTSD. We see them struggling with the trauma of this war that teenagers are getting thrown into, and that's realistic. That's a faithful portrayal of what this kind of culture would turn into. What kind of people it would develop, and it's just another really nice thing that Brandon did with this, where it would have been so easy, especially with Spensa as a main character and her particular bloodthirstiness and hero worship and all of that, her obsession with ancient myths and heroes and things like that, and ancient war,
mythology, stories, heroes. Yes.
And it would have been very easy, filtered through her lens, to have this story gloss over the harsh realities of a militaristic civilization. But Brandon didn't let that happen, and he allowed the characters around her to speak for themselves. We get political commentary from Kimmelin or FM.
I thought it was FM. Yeah,
it was FM. Yeah. Sorry, I haven't read this book in a couple of weeks. I just read it a month ago, and then we decided we were going to do it for the podcast, and I was like, I don't want to read it again right away. So I'm a little hazy on some of the details. But it was, it was really interesting how Sanderson took a first-person perspective and allowed secondary and tertiary characters to breathe and develop and have their own kind of mini arcs in a lot of ways.
They did. Yeah. Do you want to start talking about some of those characters? I mean, we could discuss Spensa, first, of course, being the main character.
Yeah, let's talk about Spensa first.
Okay. So, I want to say that I can't speak today. Our first impression of Spensa is definitely that of an odd, quirky little person. I was expecting that. I'm going to piss off a lot of people with this next sentence, but don't worry, it gets better. She reminds me a lot of Lift from Stormlight, but she's, in my opinion... she's infinitely more palatable, in my opinion. Right off the bat, on the first, I think it was the first, maybe second page, I imagined those broken rocks as the broken bodies of my enemies, their bones shattered, their trembling arms reaching upward in a gesture of total and complete defeat. I was a very odd little girl. Then that last line, for me, is what defines how she's different in that respect. She's still quirky, but she shows this immediate measure of self-awareness, which I thought was a great way to set not only the tone of her character, but a lot of Brandon's humor going forward,
Yeah, so we've talked about his humor in the past.
We have.
And I think most people at this point probably know that, generally speaking, Rob and I are not big fans of lots of Brandon Sanderson's humor.
Sure.
But I actually found myself laughing along with Skyward at several points. I was not graded by the humor the way some other books have, and that's despite the fact that it's still it's the same style, it's the same delivery that Brandon has in things like The Reckoners and the Stormlight Archive and Mistborn Era 2, where there's a funny quirk that a character has, and that's a defining character trait. You have Wayne with his hats, or you have Lift with the awesomeness and the pancakes, and you have Lopin, with the one-armed jokes, and and with Spensa, it's her grandiose statements of war and valor and stuff like that. But I found it amusing this time.
It got on my nerves.
No, I'm with Jarrod on that one. That part of it got on my nerves. I mean, like you said, Drew, there's a lot of points in this book where I did laugh out loud. But with specifically with Spence's kind of, like you listed, her grandiose kind of war cries in her terms, I was a little sick of those, like Jarrod was. Yeah.
I appreciated Mbot's humor much more than Spence's humor.
Yep. Yeah, Mbot was definitely funny.
That caused some literal laugh out louds for sure.
Yeah. What about discussing Spence's her character arc though, like her first pivotal moment for me is like when she begins to show her true defiance, would be when she decides first, to hell with everyone, I'm writing this aviation test. And a big theme in this book seems to revolve around failure and what it does to people in terms of their confidence. And for Spencer, this was the moment I felt like she came the absolute closest to true failure, was when she was deciding, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I won't write this test, But we found a few things, there were a few things rather predictable about her character, at least how it started, I thought. For example, as soon as she sees the questions on her test about algae, my brain immediately went, oh, okay, so when is she going to steal a real test and fill it out perfectly? She could just slam that thing down on the desk next day and just exit stage left. Perfect. And then, of course, we see her lagging behind after the test, and suddenly the idea comes to her. I'm just sitting there going, oh, Spencer, honey. It was so obvious, But where her character ended up, all this journey of self-discovery, it's a common thing I found in a lot of young adult books, but I think Sanderson handled it very well. He wasn't, she didn't end up in a position of too much power at the end or too much self-worth, but I really liked where her character started and where it ended up, because I think it leaves a lot of room in the future for future novels in this series to further develop that character.
Yeah, and we're talking about a YA novel. Like, YA books are like kind of by nature always going to be
exactly
self-discovery, coming of age stories. A little literary term for people. This particular trope, a coming of age story, is called a Bildungsroman.
Oh, see, I didn't know that. I'm learning stuff too.
But so pretty much every YA book you're going to read is this type of story. Like, that's just the nature of this audience. When you're writing targeted for 13 to 18-year-olds, these are people going through, major transitory and foundational developments in their lives, and so they want to read about people they can sympathize with.
Yes, relatability.
And connect to. And but that said, I do think that while Skyward had some predictable points, there's some predictable story beats in Spence's arc. There were still a couple of things that took me by surprise, and considering how many Brandon Sanderson books I've read and how well I understand his kind of proclivities as a writer, that pleased me that I wasn't able to accurately predict everything at the end of the book.
Yeah.
For Spencer, I'd also add in a theme of, I guess, social acceptance. One of my favorite moments for her was when her fellow cadets invited her into the training school and their dormitory area, and they snuck her food and all these things, and she kind of stayed the night there. That was one of my favorite moments.
Yeah, that was a very heartwarming scene. I loved that, and I also, that was another point where it kind of made me laugh, where it's Kimmelin who draws her in, and she's decked out like a ninja and trying to sneak around and being all over the top furtive. There were some situational humor moments in this book that I thought really hit home. But that scene, it started off as this kind of slapsticky, oh wow, okay, Kimlin, you can calm down a little bit here. But then when the scene really concludes and you realize what they're doing and what they're risking for Spencer, it's a touching character moment.
It is.
And it's another one of those ways that he helps develop these secondary and tertiary characters in this book.
And it introduces a lot of humanity I think, that we get to see, because we wouldn't get to see that kind of humanity out of Spencer otherwise if she wasn't there to realize, wow, I've never had this before. Wow, I don't want to leave this. Speaking of FM, were you done your point there? I don't want to interrupt you there. Yo, good.
All good.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. Speaking of FM and Kimmelin, I want to say that I kind of saw that. I didn't see that coming, but I knew they were up to something. There was a little hint that we were given earlier that I picked up on. It was when it's mentioned that FM and Kimmelin were both complaining about a cold, and had been distancing themselves for some reason. And right away, I did go, okay, they're up to something. I don't know what it is, but we found out right away what it was, and it was touching. It was, it lent this gesture of humanity, like I said, to Spencer and to those two characters that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise. I did like those tertiary characters.
And so sticking with Spencer here,
sure.
Talking about the big revelation at the end of this book, that she is the mechanism for their faster than light travel. Mm-hmm. That the engineer gene is what allows this. And so for anybody who's not aware, Brandon Sanderson has previously written a story that actually takes place in the same universe as Skyward, and that is Defending Elysium. It was an old short story that he wrote back in the mid 2000s.
This is news to me.
and this particular form of faster than light travel is a plot point in Defending Elysium.
Oh my god!
So,
how did I not know that?
So I started reading Defending Elysium when I, kind of put two and two together that it was the book that connected to Skyward. But I ended up stopping about halfway through it, where I was like, you know what? No, I don't want to know. And so I didn't get the FTL reveal yet, and that remained a big mystery for me throughout this book. And so it was nice getting that revelation at the end of this book, and how in typical Sanderson fashion he gives Spencer this ability, this fantastic ability, but it has a drawback. There's the weakness, there's the vulnerability.
Oh, you mean with their be it I like the Krell. I love the fact that they turned out to be some sort of hive mind, this entity that it was really cool idea that yes, you could tap into their communications and intercept them and actually understand them, but the deeper and deeper into there you get, the more you risk losing yourself. I thought that was a great mechanic there.
And I will also say this was the big prediction that I missed on while I was reading this book, with their the constant mystery shrouded around the Krell, and the fact that there's never any bodies to recover, and nobody's ever seen one. They don't know what they are. I was dead certain the Krell were just going to be humans.
Yeah, no, me too. And I still think some of them are. I have a couple of predictions going forward. Minor ones we'll talk about at the end. But no, I had
so
the same
that was
thought.
That was a nice twist where I was like, okay, it really is, an alien race. And I think that's Brandon becoming a little self-aware.
Yeah,
being I'm getting a little predictable with my twists. And so I'm just going to do the kind of twist that a reader who doesn't know Brandon Sanderson wouldn't expect, right? It, but the kind of twist that I don't know. I'm getting myself all mixed up trying to do double negatives. Like a reader who knows Brandon Sanderson and knows the kind of twists he's done in previous series would expect the Krell to be humans.
Wouldn't expect.
And so would.
Yeah, it would. That's why exactly. I thought I've read a lot of Sanderson.
Yeah, and so he wrote something that probably wouldn't be surprising to new readers of Sanderson. The Krell just wouldn't be a twist to them.
Yeah, I agree.
But it was a twist to veteran readers. And so he's aware of his audience.
There are other areas that I have notes written down for as well in terms of character arcs that I think Brandon realized, I think I might be getting a tad predictable. I'm going to switch it up on this one. But that's mostly with other characters. Do you guys want to move on from Spencer? Are you about finished with your?
No, let's move to Jerkface.
Okay, perfect, because this is exactly who I was talking about. Awesome.
I was,
Yeah, okay, you figured probably. So as soon as as soon as Sensa. Oh my God, I'm gonna screw up her name like 40 times. Spensa. As soon as she recognizes him as like the boy from the test, we get this description of him as this useless aristocrat pretty boy from her point of view. I started counting down the chapters until they ended up in a relationship. Like I was like, oh, okay, well, clearly, like it just seems so obvious. She's literally determined to hate him from the first glance, unconditionally. It's something that you see repeated so often in these young adult style narratives that I made the call like immediately. I considered how perfectly opposite their personalities are. One is a poor, impoverished. Oh my God! I'm just gonna give up my sentences today. A poor, impoverished girl from a dishonored family, sporting a bad attitude, and the other is a privileged boy from a renowned family with little patience for childish behavior. Their personalities are clearly different, but this is the sort of perfect duality I think that Sanderson nailed. In Mistborn with Vin and Elend, even though a lot of people I've heard aren't a big fan of that particular romance, I think that aspect of their romance was spot on. They are polar opposites, but they complement one another perfect. Like opposing and complementary personalities like this almost always end up together. And a part of me is convinced that Sanderson wrote them apart after all because too many people caught on from page 1, like even from that first glance maybe. But I'm just talking as I could not be.
From what I understand, that was not a post hoc change.
Sure.
He never intended for Spensa and Jerkface to get together in this book. I still think they'll eventually end up together.
Yeah.
At the end of this 4-book Skyward sequence. 4 books. But in case you're not aware. Yeah, he originally planned it as a trilogy, and
that's right. You told me this a couple
like the Axe of Cain, he realized like the third installment would be better served as being split into 2 books. So, but he's already written the second one that comes out this fall.
Starsight.
And then presumably he's going to do something similar once he's done with Stormlight 4 and the Lost Metal, the 4th Mistborn Era 2 book. He'll go back to his YA, like a refresher that he always does, and he'll crank out the last 2 Skyward books, I imagine. But anyway,
Jerkface,
I like Jerkface. He was maybe my favorite character in this book.
What? I mean, I liked him, but your favorite character? Huh?
Yeah, he was great. Like, I mean, Cobb was awesome too. But
oh no, I hated Cobb. Sorry. No, I don't want to say that. I don't want to say that. I liked him, but I hated how predictable everything that came out of his mouth ever was.
Sure.
You know what? Jerkface might be up there.
Jerkface was not predictable, though. He was not predictable.
He wasn't. I mean, you thought he was predictable. He was introduced immediately as the stereotype, which I kind of enjoyed how Brandon turned it on its head.
I loved how he's presented, and you're given the impression that he's going to be this like overprivileged jerkface. And to tone down the language instead of sticking with arcane language there, he's a jerkface, and but from Spence's point of view, and so she comes in with all these assumptions about him, like, oh, he's just in here because of his family, he's not gonna be good at this stuff, and then you find out like, oh no, this guy's an amazing pilot, great like strategist, tactician, like he.
Is he though? Is he that great? Yeah. I mean, he was practiced, but it's not like
he was
amazing.
He took advantage of his privilege and worked hard. He didn't just coast, which is something that I appreciated. It's something I've seen in a lot of recent science fiction fantasy books. There's almost a trope developing where there is the privileged character who coasts and just gets by on their, whatever pedigree it happens to be in that world. But I appreciated that Sanderson made Jerkface a hard worker and an actually effective and competent person, and not just made him like essentially a slapstick like straw man white privilege character that you get in a lot of books these days.
Sure.
So
I liked how earnestly he was depicted trying to learn how to become a flight leader, and I liked how he stuck with most of his team when you wouldn't blame him at all for being stuck with personalities like Spensa having to deal with. He sticks through it, and I like that about him.
Exactly. Jerkface, does not immediately, but he does eventually become this much more empathetic character, way more than I was expecting. And I was rooting for them being Spencer and Jerkface, but not quite as much as I was rooting for Raj, despite the fact that he didn't really seem very interested. But with Jerkface, I got the distinct impression that Sanderson was toying with our emotions. There was this moment when, during this brief moment of extreme emotional fragility, Spencer, she grabs a fistful of his uniform, and then she just rests her head against his chest. It's still it's personal and it's intimate, but with the amount of death and destruction and loss that we're getting at this point, you're kind of expecting a little more in the way of romance. And at this point, you're going, oh, here it is. But no, the scene just kind of ends here. And then just a chapter or two later, she sought him out and she confessed what she learned about her father, her fears about doing the same thing. And Jorgen confessed, or I'm calling him Jorgen now, confessed some serious feelings. And as a reader, you're realizing, oh my God, this is finally it. And it still doesn't happen. And it's about this point in the story, I'm starting to think, okay, they might not end up together after all.
Can it ever work with them, though, him being flight leader?
Yeah, I don't know. Did he read, like, Ellen Venture to you guys at all?
Kind of.
Kind of? I don't know. To me, it sounded like almost the exact
he's
same
less
guy.
naive. Like, Ellen is much more naive, I think, than...
Sure. I don't know. Maybe it's just, I don't know. I couldn't get Ellen out of my head as I was reading Jorgen, despite the physical differences.
Interesting.
So, are we about done with Jerkface, or do we have more to get out of the way with him?
I think we can be done with him for now. Let's move on to Raj, because you just brought him up.
Sure. I am suspicious of Raj, even though I was rooting for he and Spencer. Just, it seemed like I was a teenage boy at one time. I was finding a lot of excuses to hang out with girls that I really liked. But it turns out I think he was just really interested in Mbot and trying to fix Mbot. But I'm really suspicious of him. Really, really suspicious going forward. It seemed, and I'll tell you what.
Suspicious in
right at the very beginning, I think he's double crossing. There's something sinister about him. And I only have one real. I mean, this is an immediate impression I got based on. In the preview chapters. I remember having this impression in the preview chapters, but there are these moments when I'm trying to remember, this is months ago I read this now, these impressions, the elevators weren't working, and there was something about the way that kept lining up with his absences, but like we discovered that he's a mechanical engineer, and I thought, oh, he's perfectly capable of doing that. He's working on Mbot. He's actually gathering a lot of this technology. I feel like this is the perfect kind of character to bring things forward in the future into like a more sinister thing, because he's getting a lot of secrets now. He's learning how these systems work, and I don't know. I don't think we get enough out of him for me to totally dismiss him as I totally dismiss him as a threat going forward. I feel like he's a little too unimportant, and it's too great of a character to turn into like, a villain. I don't know. It's just, this is an impression, like I said, I think back in September when these preview chapters first came out. Having finished the book now, a little, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that going forward, but that's an impression that I had for sure with Raj.
Yeah, I never got that impression.
No,
to me, he was just kind of, he got bulldozed into this flight school dream of Spenza's and realized he didn't want to do it and found his true calling.
Perhaps. Yeah, and so I actually think Brandon is setting up Raj for a further kind of thematic extension of that, where in this book, it's very easy to see him as a potential romantic partner for Spencer. And it's very easy early on in the book to see him as like, oh yeah, he's this like great student, he's going to become a pilot, and he's going to be like her wingman and all this stuff. And then as it turns out, no, like he's not fit to be a pilot. He needed to find his own way and kind of get out from under Spencer's influence.
Okay.
And I have to wonder, based on their interactions and his complete indifference towards Spencer, whether Brandon intends on making him a homosexual or asexual
Well, he was asking about
character
FM.
in the future.
I mean, he was, you know.
I still like
I mean, he showed some clear interest in FM, and he was kind of awkward after the fact. Like, okay, never mind. I felt like he was just simply not interested in Spencer for some reason. I don't know.
It just all their relationship just always felt platonic.
I mean that could be, and it would be certainly a bold step for Brandon to take to bring Raj in that direction in future books, because this has been kind of a long time thing in some circles of Brandon Sanderson's fandom. There's kind of a demand for more LGBT representation,
for more voice.
And there's been a little bit of that in the Stormlight Archive, and
we see a little,
and Mistborn Era 2, but with like side characters, like
Renette,
side characters, and he has talked in recent interviews about like wanting at some point to write an LGBT in some manner main character, and maybe it was just like the timing of those interview questions where he brought that up in regard to when he was writing Skyward, and maybe I'm way off base on this, but I just I have this little inkling that like Raj is still figuring himself out, and I think he's going to become a more important character going forward, and he's going to get a real personal arc.
I assume. I suppose.
I don't know.
I found my note, by the way, that I had written down about Raj, what made me suspicious of him. And it's basically what I said, but I managed to phrase it a lot better when I was writing it down, as most things that I do. Okay, so right here. Raj is being a little suspicious, late twice for class with his record, complete and total access to everything concerning Mbot, Spence's most trusted friend. At that point, he was, at least. He's got to be spying for what I consider, or he's got to be spying for someone. Or like, I'm willing to bet that he could even be behind the elevators malfunctioning, though I have no idea why he would need to do that. I don't know why I'm focusing on the elevator so much. It was just like these little details that are included that I'm always super aware of. I'm always looking for because of what Brandon's done to me in his past books. But that was what I had written down about Raj. So
I mean, we do get at least an ostensive explanation for him being late.
Such a good record, though.
Well, it's because he decides like this isn't for me, and he just ends up like stopping altogether.
I was expecting it to turn out that he was spying for Ironsides, and now they have like Mbot, and now Mbot's captured, and that's where I was expecting the narrative to go.
Interesting.
But yeah.
And so I only have one more thing to say about Raj.
Sure.
And that is, his full name is Roger McCaffrey.
Yeah, I noticed that. I did notice that.
What?
I chuckled a little bit, yeah.
So there's like a clear divergence here. I want to make this very plain. It is a total coincidence that I have the same last name as Roger McCaffrey, and it is a total coincidence that I have an uncle who does work in publishing named Roger McCaffrey. As far as I know, he has never met Brandon Sanderson.
Okay.
Everything I know points to the fact that this book was specifically inspired by the like boy and his dragon epic fantasy trope that was in large part popularized by Anne McCaffrey. And that's why, he wanted to put in an Anne McCaffrey reference, so he used that last name. And also, no, I'm not related to Anne McCaffrey. I wish.
I asked Drew that right around the time I met him. Don't worry, everybody. He's not. Not that it's a bad thing. Sorry, I don't want to make that impression. I don't know why I said it that
way. But despite all that, like it's very much a coincidence with all of this. I still like every time I see that name on the page, I'm just like, ooh, nice. Yeah.
Do you want to move on to Cobb, perhaps?
Sure.
Okay, because I know we've got some. It sounds like we've got some opposing viewpoints on Cobb here.
Yeah.
I didn't enjoy his. I mean, I thought he was so pretty. I didn't enjoy Cobb. I didn't. I don't know. His humor to me was lame. His character was
not even
so
his like heroic arrival.
Yeah, oh my god. Okay, I have a whole note written down about that. I'm just gonna get this out of the way. Okay, actually, I only have two little points to talk about him, so I'll get these out of the way right away. I didn't like him. I didn't loathe him like I do Ironsides. We'll get to that later. But his character as a whole felt way too ham-fisted for me. He's such a stereotype in every way. Of course he's gruff. Of course he has a dark emotional past that he overcompensates for. Of course he decides to take on the unconventional recruit. Of course his humor is based entirely on insults delivered almost as part of casual observation. You know, for example, when Netter asks him, what about those of us who are drooling meathead idiots, but we were trained by you? And Cobb just goes, don't sell yourself short, Netter. I've never seen you drool. Yada, yada, yada. Let's continue with the rest of my orders, as if I didn't just deliver a brilliant zinger. You know? And as Jarrod just mentioned, of course he shows up in the nick of time to take on those Krell blasters with Mbot's shields. That terrible one-liner, typical of the old master berating the student in the middle of a chaotic battle. It felt like a really, really cheesy action movie directed by a 14-year-old. I was not a fan. I rolled my eyes so hard in that moment that I'm not entirely certain they've managed to come back into focus yet.
How do you really feel?
Yeah, tell us how you really feel.
I don't want to make this a condemnation of Brandon Sanderson. I just want to make it a condemnation of that damn character. I just found him so predictable that I didn't enjoy reading him, like, ever. But I didn't hate him. I didn't want him to die like Ironsides. So
you can have a well-written character that you hate.
Sorry, say again?
You can have a well-written character that you hate.
Oh, sure. Some of the best written characters are the ones that you hate the most. Mm-hmm. Joffrey, for example.
Bairn.
Oh God. That's not a Saint Bairn.
Anyway.
Oh Lord. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, I know. Like, how terrible is that they have to like? Oh, but that's
two words have never belonged farther apart.
Conversation.
Yeah.
But no. So my thoughts on Cobb. Like, yes, he's a predictable character. Like he is the kind of person that we have seen before in many movies and read in many books. I still loved him. Like he's, and maybe this is like coming from my experience as like a competitive hockey player and some of the coaches that I've had over the years, but he specifically reminds me a lot of my high school hockey head coach.
Okay.
Like they, to a T, they're like the same person.
What's his man's name? Give him a shout out. Let's hear it.
Clayton Kasager. He was absolutely fantastic. Definitely my favorite hockey coach ever.
Awesome.
But he had like kind of the same, like gruff, abrasive like approach, but with always like an undercurrent of humor like woven in,
like a suffering kind of humor.
Yeah, and like so this is gonna get. Oh man, I really want to tell this story, but we're on like our YA podcast episode. All right, no, I'm gonna say this, and if you're listening to this,
Pat,
and
get ready to censor, man.
Any kind of
here it comes
more mature content. There was one hockey game, like our high school team was good. We were ranked number 2 in the state, and we were undefeated going into this game, and we were playing against the number 1 team in the state on their home rink. And he walks into the locker room before the game, and it was dead silent in there. Like, everybody was so nervous, like, so tense. And normally we're all joking around and stuff and loose and having a good time. But he walks in, and he just stops. He's like, who woke up with a Woody this morning? And just immediately broke the tension. And, like, and we played one of our best games of the season from that point.
Awesome.
And, and that's the kind of thing that I could see Cobb doing, right? Like he has the ability to like break the tension in a like a rough time for these cadets, and so that was something I appreciated about him. I liked his character because of that.
Okay.
I liked him. He was a bit predictable, but I think he was the exact instructor that Spenza needed.
Oh yeah.
And I did enjoy the fact that it turns out he's teaching them a lot of things that the other pilots aren't learning. I like the fact that, of course, Cobb's class comes out, and as they're just before graduation, they are just showing up the other pilots. And even the other pilots are like, hey, you looking for a flight squadron to join afterwards? It's like, it wasn't unredeemable. Irredeemable? Whatever that word is. Irredeemable, thank you. I didn't hate him as much as I hated Ironsides. I just thought he was so predictable, and I don't know. I just expected
So
something
you hated
out of the ordinary.
Ironsides.
I liked Ironside.
I wanted her to die from page 1, and I still want it to happen.
Oh, so this is going back to my point earlier, where Brandon managed to give like at least mini character arcs to like these side characters, and Ironsides is one of them. I mean, she is just
She's ruthless.
She's a witch.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say something a lot worse there.
Well, no, I'm trying to censor myself for the YA episode here. This is not Kane. You know, and the way she treats Spencer is so bad. But then you find out, like, no, she's justified with this. There is, like, obviously she doesn't have complete information because, as we find out, like, Spencer has like a way around it, you know. But like, she has hard empirical evidence that people with these genes are totally vulnerable, and like
empirical and personal evidence that she was directly involved with.
Yeah, like she's doing this for like, you know, for a good reason. And so it was a cool way that I thought Brandon took a character who started off looking like she was about to turn into Dolores Umbridge, and and made me not like her by the end of it, but at least feel some sympathy for this tough situation she finds herself in, and that she's like trying to navigate the best she can. And
I mean, outside of Kimmelane, she's my favorite. She's my favorite side character.
Yeah, I loved Kimmelane.
Okay. Well, before I get into this, I'm gonna open up another drink.
Here we go.
All right. So, I think it was a really interesting stylistic choice that Brandon makes with her chapters for the most of the book. Like, for one, they're all interludes until the last few viewpoints. She was in part 5 here and there. I'm not a fan, in this instance, of listing her title with every introduction to her viewpoints. It felt overdone. Every time we got back to her, it was Admiral Judy Ironsides Evans. There was never, like, it just, I read those words too many times in succession that I got sick of them.
Can I say something about that?
Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
I think that is it's him using the opportunity for a different point of view to give you insight into how she thinks of herself.
Yeah, and I have a note written down about that later here, though. But yeah, and I, for example, there are other characters in Brandon Sanderson's, body of writing that I think he did this really well with. Not touching on any kind of spoilers at all, but for example, in the Stormlight Archive, Zeth, Sun Villano, Truthless of Shinovar, you know, and how he, every time we get back to him, not every time, but occasionally, suddenly it changes depending on how he thinks of himself, I did realize that's what he was going for, but in this case, I don't think we got enough of an arc out of Judy Ironsides for it to feel justified listing her title so many times. It never changed. But going on, I said I loathed this character both as a person and as a narrative device. I figured there was a reason that she was trying to deny Spencer her pilot status, and I was absolutely ready to find out that she wasn't just holding a childish grudge. And of course, this turned out to be true, but for me, it didn't really exonerate her at all. Because of the way she treated Spencer. I just hated that. For me, the only redeeming parts of her chapters were how excellently they were written. Brandon's prose really shines with her viewpoints, though. Like I said, I hated her as a character. I hated her as a device. But stylistically, I really enjoyed the rapidly switching viewpoints from near the end. Though I admit by the last time she whispered the defect, I was starting to get sick of that line too. But to balance that complaint, I will say that my absolute favorite Ironsides line was when Spencer first started fighting like 15 Krell above Alta alone. And at that point, Ironsides was asked, have you ever seen flying like this before? And she thinks that she has, from one pilot. I got chills in that moment. Literal chills. Like, I actually shivered, which harkens back to something I've been saying over the course of this entire podcast, and not just in this episode, but since we've started. An author really proves his or her merit when they can elicit an actual physical reaction from the reader. No matter how small. And I did get an actual physical reaction to that. I will say, Brandon Sanderson wrote her brilliantly. I just hated her guts. I hated her. But I will say, again, a couple stylistic things, like I mentioned earlier. Just the repeating of her titles over and over again. And the defect was just one too many times. Just one too many times.
See, I like characters like her that you're ostensibly supposed to hate that are doing things for pretty good reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. I wasn't. Yeah. Were you surprised on that subject?
She lets her personal grudges get in the way, I guess. Obviously.
Speaking of that ulterior motive, were you surprised at all when you found out the truth about Chaser and what he did?
A little bit, yeah. I think early on, we're expected to buy into Spence's version of events. Mm-hmm. That there must have been a mistake, that like he wasn't, and then as it goes on, you're like, oh well, what is this defect? Like, it's presented as cowardice, right? Mm-hmm. But as a longtime reader of Brandon's books, it's more than that. I just never quite put my finger on what exactly it was.
Exactly, yeah.
And so it was like, it was less of a surprise than just like a feeling of satisfaction finding this information.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, I was being used to Brandon's writing at this point. I was expecting there to be something that we didn't know, some reason for her grudge, and we did get that. Like I said, as Drew said, I knew there was something. Cobb's kind of pseudo confirmation definitely played into it a lot when he refused to deny what Spencer was saying in that one scene there. Yeah. But what I really appreciated about this is that it was the exact opposite of what we were suspecting was really going on. We thought that there was a reason that Chaser did what he did, and that, well, I mean, I guess technically there was, but we thought that it was going to turn out that Chaser was totally the bad guy, or the good guy, and that he was set up or something like this. But what we found out was the exact opposite.
Yeah, so my going back to my earlier other wrong prediction where I said I thought the Krell were going to be humans, what I thought it was going to turn out to be was that like he actually got a look inside a cockpit and saw another human and was like, this whole thing's a mistake, what are we doing? And so he was going to like refuse to fight them and become a pacifist, and that would spark a pretty major character change for Spencer, Yeah. But obviously that was all wrong.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, but yeah, I just to recap, I liked that it was kind of a step in the other direction. I appreciated that for sure.
I don't know. I liked it. I didn't have any major. I guess I liked the duality of it, where, Spencer was right that they were lying, but it was for different reasons.
So I only have really one other character that I want to touch on.
Sure.
And very briefly, for obvious reasons. How do we feel about Doomslug?
Oh, we're not going to talk about Mbot? Or we did already talk about Mbot. What am I saying? Sorry. Doomslug? I don't... I'm very torn with Doomslug, because Doomslug is either completely irrelevant or absolutely central to everything that's going on, and we just don't understand it yet.
He is absolutely central to everything going on.
Right?
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
There's just no reason
he's
for
got
that
the
character.
Cytonic, Doomslug clearly can move faster than light. What I think is going to happen here is that she's going to find some way to integrate Doomslug into Mbot, or that Mbot was previously integrated with Doomslug, and so you don't actually need a pilot with these genes to use, the faster than light travel. So. It's very clear that Doomslug has the ability to freaking teleport.
A bigger part to play, I think, Doomslug has.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
I like Doomslug. I loved Mbot.
So.
Yeah.
But that was all I needed to say.
Okay, good. Yeah. So
now I understand all the Sanderson posts that I see on social media when he says
I know.
He's leaving Doomslug stickers around.
Yeah, and you get the sense that maybe it's just because, of course, a lot of fans are really attached to this character all of a sudden, inexplicably, without much reason, just like a couple other kind of smaller characters. Stick! But, yeah. But, I'm calling it now. Speaking of, since we're actually starting to predict a thing or two, do you want to throw down some predictions going forward? So I have a couple, 3 predictions to make going forward with the rest of the series. Right. Was that? Oh yeah, sorry. Okay, I thought you were going to start saying something. Okay, so my first prediction going forward is that Mbot is. Let me see what I had written right here. Mbot. I think he is he's not merely an artificial intelligence. He's either a real human or a copy of one's brain reassembled to fit into circuitry. And more, I'm calling it right now that he is actually a pre-Krell War human. Maybe even an Earth time-based human. Like, it would explain how, like, a certain little quirks of his, number one, like how he seems to take pauses to think, how he backtracks in conversations to get more context for things that confuse him. But more importantly are his references. He references pieces of art and symphony that we have nowadays. He makes a reference to Schrodinger's cat. I don't know if anybody picked it. I assume most people picked up on that. But, you know, I think going forward he's going to have a much bigger history than we expect. And he's going to be much more fleshed out as a character because of that, and more central because of that. Mm-hmm. My second prediction is that space between heartbeats in Sanderson's magic system is the equivalent of the theoretical quantum field. I think that's the inspiration that Brandon took from that, and I think that's how he's gonna treat that in the future. And my last prediction is about these black ships that are surrounding the Lifebusters. The ones whom Spencer can't hear orders sent to, who we witness, as other pilots put it, flying slightly better than your standard Krell interceptors. I think they are ships that are piloted, and I think that they are ships that are piloted by actual Krell, or if not that, maybe even actual humans. And that would explain why Spence is not able to tap into those particular communications and hear, you know, and anticipate those black ships as she can with the rest of the Krell.
Okay.
So those are my predictions.
I've always thought that maybe Mbot was like Mbot's previous pilot had downloaded their intelligence or something into Mbot. I could see that.
Well, okay. I'm going to refrain from predictions.
Okay.
Would be a little unfair for a couple of reasons. So.
What do you mean? Oh, yeah. I forgot. Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. So, hold on. What is this point that I have here that I'm looking at? Sorry. Let's just continue. I'll figure that out later. So, do we have any anything else you guys want to get out of the way as far as closing thoughts? Is there anything that we're missing or that I'm totally forgetting that we need to do at this point?
I just want to speak to the quality of this book overall. Mm-hmm. I think this is legitimately one of Brandon Sanderson's best books.
Okay. Yep.
Among his Cosmere stuff that I've read, it's probably a little bit like a hair below Firefight for my favorite. But just generally speaking, when I consider Brandon Sanderson's canon of works, there's like a top tier that's Oathbringer and Words of Radiance, and then there's a second tier down. And that's where Skyward falls in. And that's with Firefight and Bands of Mourning.
Wow.
And and I really liked this book. You know, he did some new things that I don't think he's done before as a writer. I loved how he used a blend of first and third person limited points of view in this. I enjoyed the humor for the most part. I enjoyed the characters almost unanimously.
Okay.
I thought there were satisfying twists. There was a great climax to this book. It was paced well. Sanderson continues to get better as a writer, and that's so exciting for me as a fan of his. Where you consider the quality of stuff that he started at, which was already pretty high, and that he just keeps getting better. And that makes me so excited to see what happens with like Stormlight 4 and 5 and the Lost Metal. And when we hopefully eventually get Nightblood,
yeah,
or the Threnody novel, or the Silverlight novella. You know, these Cosmere things that he's putting off, and Dragonsteel. Like, you know, man, I can't wait for some of these things, especially because he's going to have so much work to improve, to keep improving between now and then. And this book, I feel like, is just another signpost on that road saying, yes, Brandon Sanderson is still getting better.
Yeah. I just want to say that in direct contrast to the last 20 minutes I've spent bitching about Cobb and Ironsides, I also really liked this book. I wouldn't say it's right in the top two, like Drew said. You said Words of Radiance, Oathbringer were like you're saying in your top two there.
Yeah.
And you said Skyward in your arbitrary list there would fall just one tier below it. I don't know if I would agree with that. I think it'd be one further down. I noticed he didn't include Hero of Ages in there, which for me is in tier 1. Right alongside Words of Radiance in Oathbringer. Okay. I loved Hero of Ages, but that's totally aside the point.
We'll get to that a couple months down the road.
Yes, we will. But I do want to say that I love that in a volume this size, which, I mean, this is a YA novel. This is very small compared to his average. Sanderson can continue to surpass our expectations and not only answer a few big questions, but pose even bigger questions that follow after. Mm-hmm. You know, the reveal of what Spence's father really did was somehow worse than anything I was expecting, and it was somehow creepier than anything I was expecting. And then as Spence's life, the eyes, and then as Spence's life just kind of resumes with some normalcy, we just start to relax, and then Cobb has his brief conversation with Spencer about the hundreds of the eyes in the darkness surrounding you. And I was like, okay, we're not quite out of the woods yet. But the amount of questions that he can make the reader ask in a volume this small, relatively speaking, I thought was nothing short of astounding. And I totally agree with what Drew has said. And as much as I was bitching about what Ironsides, I do want to reiterate that I say that her viewpoints were written very well. Those were some of the best written viewpoints I've ever seen come out of Brandon Sanderson. This book, for me, I would probably place it overall as like a 7.8, maybe 8.0 out of 10. Just really quickly throwing together a number there. But I'm definitely excited for Starsight. Like, I'm counting down the days for that one. And I really look forward to where this narrative is going in the future. It was definitely worth the time. I bought it on Audible, and I bought it on e-reader, and no regrets.
I was very happy with it. I thought he built tension in a typical Sanderson style. I think that kind of... I compare it to Steelheart and Firefight, I would say. Okay. I think Sanderson... I like that Sanderson pulls off YA pretty well.
He does.
There's a lot of YA out there that's pretty terrible quality, in my opinion, and I think that he does a very good job with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that.
Much agreed on this side, too.
So, do we want to move into the final draft, then?
Yeah, we could do that.
Let's do it.
Okay. I mean, I can start us off since I prepared a little bit, but I didn't prepare too much, so mine should be pretty quick here. I did bring a thematically appropriate beer today, for the first time. I think it might be with me, but this is a beer here that I've been drinking from Cameron's Brewing Company in Oakville, Ontario. So this is pretty close to me. This is only about 3 hours, maybe 2 hours drive from where I live in Ontario. This is a cream ale, which I've never had before. It's a little sweeter than I expected.
Yeah,
sorry?
Good style.
That's a style, yeah. And this one here is called Cosmic. And it's got a whole bunch of moon and stars all over it. So, yeah, I mean, it's 5%. It's, your normal strength. By this point, my beer's a little warm, but it's still, enjoyable. So I think that speaks a lot towards its quality right there.
Nice. Yeah. No,
sounds tasty.
I like cream ales quite a lot. They're
cream ales. I don't think I've heard of
them. They're an underutilized style, I feel like.
Yeah. Cool. All right, what are you guys drinking?
So I went with a Dunkel Lager from Grimm Brothers Brew House called the Fearless Youth. So I thought that was a little fitting given our context today.
I would agree.
It's quite good.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of lagers like this.
Normally I see you bringing porters or stouts onto the podcast.
That is definitely most common, yes.
Yeah, we were recording this at 11 a.m. on a Sunday, though, so... Despite that, though, I did bring a stout.
I'm sure you did. Okay, let's hear it, man.
And I'll say I think Jarrod actually beat me on this one for thematically appropriate. My weekend's been a little bit of a mess, so I was in a rush this morning. Like, I kind of just grabbed the first thing that I was like, oh, this is a good beer and it can fit. So I'm drinking an Imperial Stout from Prairie Artisan Ales, called Bomb. And so it's an Imperial Stout aged on coffee and vanilla beans and chili peppers. And
what?
Yeah, and so it's really good. So Prairie Bomb is like a
all episode without cursing. I just did it twice in 1 second. Sorry. Go ahead.
I mean, it's really good. It's got a little bit of that like spicy bite in the finish, but it plays really well with the chocolate. Very tasty. But even better than that, so it's brewed with coffee beans, right? And the coffee beans are sourced from Spaceship Earth Coffee Company.
Oh God, really?
So I got a double whammy here.
That's pretty thematic.
Dang. All right. Cool.
But yeah. Prairie does good stuff, and I haven't had them on the podcast yet, so I thought it was a good opportunity to give them a shout out.
Another one to write down for when I visit, man. Oh man, I'm gonna get alcohol poisoning at this point.
Well, so before we wrap this thing up today, we do have an announcement to make.
Mm-hmm.
And I am sitting here right now with a brand new signed copy of Skyward. And we would like to give this away. So what we want to do is basically as soon as this episode goes live, there's going to be a post in the Inking Out Loud podcast Facebook group calling for your what call sign would you give yourself?
Ooh.
Had you been a cadet in the Skyward universe here, and whoever has what we think is the best call sign, so this will be subjective, but
yes,
our favorite call sign, you will get this book for free. We will ship it to you. All we'll need is your address. But so in order to enter into this, just join the Inking Out Loud Facebook group and comment on that post with your call sign, and we'll make a choice.
And I just want to add that if you name yourself Stick, I will personally ban you from the group. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. That's a total joke. I just wanted to say it. Sorry. All right.
Oh my gosh. We're going to get so many that are almost Stick.
I just wanted to call it because there's going to be a bunch of them.
So we look forward to giving this thing away. It's a signed Brandon Sanderson book, and hopefully we'll be able to do a few more of these in the future. But this is our first giveaway. So
awesome. I look forward to it. And I didn't know about this until right as we were about to record the podcast. Drew picked up the book, he opened it and said, check this out, I want to give this away. And I saw the autograph at the very beginning, and I went, what? I don't even have one of those. That's awesome. Awesome. So we're excited to be giving that away. Stay tuned, everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are we doing next week, man?
Next week we are returning to Kane. We will be covering the entirety of Kane Black Knife. It's a much shorter book than Hero's Dire Blade of Taishal, so we're going to be doing the whole thing in one episode. It won't be as grim as the last couple of Kane episodes, thankfully.
I think Blade of Taishal even if you tried.
Yeah, the darkest in the series. But yeah, so next week we'll be doing the whole book. And so for now, this has been, what was it, episode 16?
16, I think this is, unless we throw anything bonus in between. Well, you never know what might happen, right?
Well, you never know.
But formally speaking, this is episode 16, Skyward, Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah, so as usual, I'm Drew McCaffrey, and I got with me Rob Santos and our special guest, Jarrod Livingston.
Thanks for having me, guys.
And
thanks for coming, dude.
Thanks for listening.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.